Hi, I'm looking at the article Implicit Connections with Nature by Schultz, Shriver, Tabanico, and Kazian. And what they're looking at in this article is how do you take implicit things such as a connectedness to nature and compare that or correlate that with explicit items such as environmental behaviors or attitudes. Environmental experiences are very personal phenomena, and so for me personally, an experience at the age of 13 on Flat Top Mountain, Rocky Mountain National Park was extremely meaningful. And so what we're looking for is how do we quantify and really analyze those types of experiences. The difficulty in quantifying the implicit is that it's really difficult for people to capture their own feelings. George Mallory struggled with this, the great explorer, in taking these experiences and putting them onto paper and really expressing emotions and observations. The issue is, can we take implicit connections and predict environmental attitudes? And then do the connectedness with nature, does it exist within or outside of consciousness? So is the individual even consciously aware of their connectedness? One of the needs for this study is that the human behavior is adversely affecting the environment and doing so at a very alarming rate. And so what we want to understand is, are those that are harming the environment even consciously aware of their negative attitudes towards the environment? And how can we predict those and then ultimately encourage pro-environmental behaviors? And so there are basically three categories in the article of attitudes towards environment. We have an egotistical approach, and which is focused solely on me. We have an altruistic approach, which is focused on other humans, and a biospherical approach focused on the environment. And so when we look at these, what we're really trying to determine is how connected is someone to nature, and is that degree of connectedness a predictor of their attitudes towards the environment, and do they fit into a certain of the three categories? This really presents what has become a pretty popular idea and pretty interesting idea, that really the avenue of environmental research is the human brain, not necessarily environmental actions or policies itself, but understanding how humans process their connection with the environment and their experiences with the environment. So there are correlations that arose from the study, and from those we have positive correlations between environmental behavior and biospherism, and then environmental behavior and implicit association with nature. And with those we have also some negative. There is a methodological error that really comes up in the study, and that is the generalization of ideas to the general population, even though we have a pretty biased sample. And so the sample was using college students from a specific university, probably fitting in this 20 to 24-year-old age group, which is really just a small portion of the general population. Furthermore, not only do we have a small portion of the general population age-wise, we also have a pretty small portion geographically. And so the assumption is carried over that environmental attitudes and connectedness in one part of the country would carry over for all parts of the country, and that's probably a pretty dangerous assumption. Another issue that really comes from this biased sample is in their age range. They have a bias towards partially or underdeveloped frontal lobes or prefrontal cortexes, which are finalizing their development towards the age of 20, and so early college students have not actually finished that development process. Another aspect of the study was the retention component, and in the retention component we looked for over periods of time, are those attitudes and connectedness staying the same, and those environmental attitudes do, and so that shows that this is actually a pretty slow changing process. One of the quantitative findings I really think comes across as very interesting is a negative correlation between altruism and biospherism. And so individuals that are likely to view the earth and environment as all connected are not likely to have motives of preserving the environment for their fellow humans. So this is really a correlation study, and the issue with correlations is that we lose the individual in the sample. The other concern is that correlation cannot extend beyond the sample, and so we really cannot assume any correlations beyond the sample of these college students at a single college and university. in California. The real issue is that environmental experiences are completely personal. And so by choosing a sample that looks at a population, we lose the individual, we lose that personal nature and that individual aspect. Now, the author suggested some areas for future research, including patterns of environmental behavior, what patterns are likely to follow, cultural variability, and then the malleability. So how do you influence environmental attitudes, and can we influence that by encouraging environmental connectedness? Now, what I think is most interesting is that interaction between altruism and biospherism. So why do people, how do people relate to each other, and how do people relate to the environment, and why does there seem to be a bit of a disconnect between the two? The real value in this topic is to understand how we connect with nature, and then how we get to experience that fundamental human aspect of asking questions about our environment, and in exploring those questions. And, really the behavior and the essence of what it means to be human. Really the shame of the methodology is that we lost the individual. As someone who started their academic life as an ecologist, I have a lot of respect and admiration for the type specimen, that one sample within a population that represents a whole new morphology, a whole new classification, a whole new category, and that is what needs to be studied in environmental connections.